I'm
Talking of which,
What the hell was that? One lesson I learned when I was in my 20s was it's okay to say, no, I don't know that, but I'll go figure it out, or I'll go find the answer for you, and not to be so proud. And I learned early on not to bullshit people, because especially once the internet came of age, you can't bullshit people anymore, or else you just go look it up and say, no, you're wrong. That's not true at all, you know, so integrity is very important to me. Well, it started with David Manley, who actually started his first company up here in England. He immigrated out of South Africa in the 80s, in the early 1980s, and started a little company called Vacuum Tube Logic here in London, and building hi-fi equipment, power amplifiers, tube amps.
which is still an area that Manley is involved with successfully.
That's the roots of the company, definitely. So he went to a CES show in the States, and it was George Cardis of the Cardis audio wire company, cable company. He said, hey, you should come to Southern California. That's where we've got all this aircraft industry and a lot of manufacturing capability, and the weather's great and all that. So David ended up in Southern California in...
What a shame.
What's that?
What a shame.
What a shame. No, I appreciate the weather in California for sure. So that was the roots of the company. As far as how I got into it, I was in college. I was at Columbia studying music. And I knew I wasn't a good enough saxophone player to make my living playing saxophone. And I also had this real insecurity about, I didn't want to graduate from college not knowing like where my career was. So I was inspired by a few factors, and I decided to take a semester off, and I drove a little Volkswagen Beetle from Atlanta, where I grew up, out to Southern California. And originally I was intending to go up to San Francisco and try to talk my way into working for Bill Graham, he was one of my inspirations. His son was in my class at Columbia, and he came one day and taught us about the music industry. And it's like, that was when I decided I wanted to go out to California. But as it turned out, I stopped in LA, and my dad, my stepfather, had given me 3 names of 3 guys that had worked for him at Ampeg, 20 years prior. And I called up the first guy, and he did not pick up the phone. This is before cell phones and voicemail and all that, and cups and strings. And the second guy was at Fender, and he told me to call David and Luke Manley out in Chino, California. They're 2 South Africans building tube amplifiers. And I was like, whoa, that sounds weird, but sure. And I went out there, and, my first job was learning how to make a proper cup of British tea. And then I was put on the production line, learning how to solder. I didn't know anything about electronics at all. And I quickly realized, like, oh, I took French in high school. I should have taken Spanish. And so I learned, just from the ground up how to build gear. But that was the origins of the company. It came from the audiophile world, and then that's how I got into it. In that same year, the Scientologists actually requested a preamplifier design from David Manley and I think Mark Levinson and a couple other hot cats at the time. And David's preamp design won, and they ordered 60 of them. And that is how the pro audio side of Manley came to be in 1989. So all of a sudden we're building 60 mic pre's.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a big order.
So it's the fickle finger of fate.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
as they say.
again, like if the first dude had not picked up the phone, I might have been, or had picked up the phone, I might have been at Crate Amplifiers.
So the company obviously grew quite quickly, and you were very much an integral part of that.
Yeah.
To the point where you took over the company.
That's a short story, but yeah.
And you must have been on a very steep learning curve, both about the recording industry and about electronics. So tell me a little bit about those early days and the learning curve and the philosophy behind Manley.
Well, the next product after those mic preamps was actually this product here, the Manley Enhanced Pultec EQ.
It's one of my favorites.
I know it is. Well, it's a funny story, that one, and I'm always honest with this stuff. I don't really bullshit too much, as you can tell. But we had an engineer working at VTL in those days named Richard, and I remember they didn't borrow an original Pultec. In fact, an original Pultec never entered the building. It was a tube tech.
Really?
Yeah, and so I think I still have this piece of paper today, but Richard opened up the tube tech and like did a tracing of the board, like physically, and reverse engineered it, by drawing the little resistors in on the piece of paper. And that was how they got the passive EQ section. David never intended to replicate the tube stages. He put his own thing into it, and then he added a couple frequencies. But yeah, I think I could produce that piece of paper if you asked me to. My job that year, I just started at the company, and then I went back to finish my degree. But I remember taking that sketch piece of paper, and David asked me to draw the schematic for him because it was kind of hard to organize the passive EQ circuit. So that was one of my first jobs, was drawing the schematic. It was kind of working with the reverse engineering, as it were, and then giving him a couple, and he's like, oh, no, I don't like the way that is. And I just, another piece of graph paper, because this is before computer drawing, and draw it out by hand. So I learned early on reverse engineering and drawing schematics, and I got onto the QC bench, onto the workbench really early in that first year. And I was, testing products coming off the production floor, and oftentimes those products had no schematic already drawn for them. And so it's like, oh, okay, reverse engineer our own product so that here's a very beautiful schematic that anyone can follow. So I cut my chops in those early days with that stuff, and also learning how things work, learning how things don't work, and solving a lot of problems, because the designs, I use that term loosely, were really rough and really just thrown together, and all of a sudden we're building 100 of these things. And maybe the transformer's a little noisy, or maybe, so I had no training in this stuff. I had to just figure it out, because the customers would get hold of me like, hey, I just bought this thing and it's noisy. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a little noisy. And I'd, get some sheet metal out and play with material and move things around, or try to shield a high impedance point on the circuit. And I learned a lot in those years just fixing existing products.
So this is it's fascinating, because actually learning on the job must have meant developing a whole load of skills, from man management, from teamwork, to the realities of, it's all very well sitting down with a piece of paper, as lots of companies do, and designing a piece of equipment, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to deliver in the studio.
Yeah, well, I didn't even know what a limiter was, because I'm not a recording engineer. I played saxophone. So I knew, in theory, you put this level in, you get that level out. I could draw you some curves, but then I didn't know what the point of it was, but I would work with our customers, and they would help educate me how to listen for these kind of effects, which I don't think are very innate. Oh, you want more room sound, use that limiter. But I mean, a common person wouldn't know that unless they're shown, now listen to the room sound when I do this. It's, oh, okay, I get it now. So
I mean, one thing that I've always totally admired and respected about you is that in this industry, more than many, it is so hard for women to open doors and to be accepted as an equal and to get the opportunities and take the opportunities. It's a battle that we've been fighting here at Funky Junk and up at Snap Studios for years, because I think, you know, I think it's absolutely crazy that in such a progressive industry, you know, there are so many kind of reactionary last century attitudes. But, you know, it's incredible credit to your abilities, you know, but also your modesty, you know, and your your no-nonsense attitude, you know, that it seems to have never been an issue with you. I mean, have you ever found this as an issue either in the workplace or in the business environment?
As far as back in the early days, about, you know, being taken seriously as a chick, or I was more discriminated against, I guess, not discriminated against, but not taken seriously just because I was young. And it didn't have to do as much with my gender, I don't think so. But like I always say when they put me on these women in audio panels or something like that, when I'm working, I've just got work to do. I'm not thinking about what sexual organs I have, you know. We've just got to get the job done, and that's cool. But there's lots of, these days I think young women have a lot better chance coming up now and are becoming, I'll give you an example. We were at the AES show last weekend at the Javits Center in New York. For the first time ever, there was a line in the girls' room. And that's never happened, because usually there's just like 5 of us in the whole show. But there were a lot of women at the show this time.
Manley has always offered all those traditional values of service, support and quality, coupled to a very unusual degree of loyalty to their distributors, to their dealers, and also to their clients. That if, you know, it's one thing, now here's something that not a lot of people know. Only once in my life have I sat down and unsolicited written a letter of compliment to a manufacturer. That was maybe 15 years ago, when we used to buy microphones made, badged Langevin.
Langevin, yeah.
I stand corrected.
Langevin.
And they came with the most honest handbook I've ever encountered, which started off by saying, these microphones are made in China. We import them into the States, and then it explained what Langevin were owned by Manley, explained what Manley did to bring the microphones up to their standard. And
I'll tell you.
Yeah, for £300, $500, they're astonishingly good. We've still got clients who thank us for recommending them all those years ago.
I'll tell you though, we were one of the very first people to import these Chinese microphones, and we took over that importation gig from another entity that was up in Northern California. And he was bringing in those CR3A Chinese mics. Yeah. Now, in the first couple years, or year or so, they would come in, you know, a big pallet of them would come in, and we would just ship them right out. But then, half of them weren't working, right? So then it's like, okay, we better at least plug them in and check them before we ship them out. Okay, so that was my job at the time, and I would open up the microphone, I would take the base off, and, you know, a capacitor would fall out on the floor, because their soldering was just crap. It just really was. So after a while, I actually laid up a new board for it, because they also had a ribbon connector in the middle, and that was a big failure point as well. And I connectorized the 2 boards that sandwiched up. But yeah, after a time we said, you know what, the capsule's great, the output transformer's fine, the metalwork's acceptable for the price and all that. Y'all keep doing that, and just don't even get near the thing with the soldering iron. We'll build the electronics in Chino, not China, that's our town, in America. And, you know, just send us the chassis and we'll load the guts into it. And we did that for a while until, you know, I'd look in Mix Magazine or something and see I could buy 2 MXL microphones for what I was paying for the chassis and without any labor, you know, and I'm like, yeah, screw this. And then I gave up on it, because at that time, I guess we were just being taken advantage of a little bit, just overpaying for what we were getting.
Yeah, it's a shame. They're nice mics. In fact, the whole Launcherville range, I was a big fan of. I mean, we were talking earlier about how I'm a fan of optical compressors, and Launcherville made a very, very nice stereo version of probably based on an LA3A, the Uri, which is the most underrated, but one of my favourite limiters.
It was based on the existing Manley L-op, just with a discrete solid state makeup gain stage instead of tubes, that's all. Yeah. But the sidechain was all the same.
But I think that has the Launcherville range been discontinued now?
Yeah, we just, I wanted to just focus on the Manley brand, so we've just put the Longevin brand to sleep for a while. And it's possible we bring it back at some point, but I found it's easier just to market the strong Manley brand. And as my USA dealer wrangler says, Marek, he says, whip the strong horse. And so, path of least resistance sometimes in something like marketing is going to be a little easier.
So the last few years I've seen you release some interesting new products, and you're now hitting the 30-year mark. What are the plans for the next 30 years? Is it more of the same?
I want to go ride my motorcycle in South America or something. No, it's a good question. There's still a lot of little outboard pieces to make. Definitely, the last couple years, we were very successful drawing upon our experience and streamlining production techniques and making things easier and faster to build so that we could bring the prices down. Like the core, the Manley core is half the price of the VoxBox. The VoxBox we designed in 1997, I think it was. And, 20 years later almost, we figured out a few things like how we could take a build time of, say, 6 hours down to 1.
So talking of which, how do you see Manley, a company very much based on hardware, working in the digital age?
Well, digital, that whole area is not my field of expertise, okay? So I'll just call that out right now. I, of course, can find people to work with, which we've always done. The plug-in thing, we've partnered up with Universal Audio, and
I've heard of them.
Yeah, they did a great job, and I really held their feet to the fire to keep the plug-in emulations very faithful to the real things. And how it works in the market, you could say that that's the entry-level Manley product, right? Or it's the demo version. And it's wonderful because it exposes the Manley brand to huge numbers of people that we might not even hit, And so in proof of that, like, I don't get these questions from people like, hey, what's the best setting on the Massive Passive for drums? They've already played with it in the computer because they already have the UAD plugin. So that's really great. So it educates, it's a demo version, people get to play with things, and it doesn't cost very much. So you could say that that's the entry level. Then with products like the core, that's the mid-level thing. And then we still have the top-level guy, the VoxBox, say, which hits the top of the market, the neoclassic, variable mu, VoxBox. And then there's the core and the new mu. But the new mu is kind of a different animal. But it's also, the new mu is targeted more towards electronic music rather than maybe grungy rock music. With the variable mu suits best sometimes because variable mu has such a big sound to it and really puts its footprint on your songs. The new mu is more neutral and maybe better suited for electronic music, for instance.
It's refreshing to hear somebody talk about music rather than about tubes and transistors. So I'm going to ask what kind of music you listen to when a few moments you could get to unwind at the end of a crazy week.
Mark, I play music all day when I'm working because most of my day-to-day job is typing emails, and then I'll mute the music and talk to somebody. But it's communication is what I do all day. So I stream. I'm the laziest audiophile possible. I stream French radio station FIP, F-I-P, and expose myself to all kinds of new stuff that I wouldn't necessarily hear. I'm really entrenched in the late 60s, early 70s stuff. I mean, the psychedelic stuff, and there's a cool radio station called Psychedelicized Radio that I listen to all the time that gets into the deeper cuts. Years ago, I was thumbing through a CD bin, and you know, I'm a big Talking Heads and David Byrne fan. I saw this CD that said compiled by David Byrne. I'm like, well, I love David Byrne. I'm going to buy this, and it was all the Brazilian music from the early 70s, the Tropicalismo movement, and that exposed me to an entire new world of music, and I just love that stuff. I have a real passion for all that Brazilian stuff from that time. Post Bossa Nova, and artists like Maria Bethânia and George Ben and Gilberto Gil and all those guys are just wonderful music.
What would you say your high point in this industry has been?
Wow. There's so many. I mean, I got to meet and work with Ray Charles, you know, and Etta James, like these real classic people like that. So the people, just being able to meet these wonderful people, Phil Ramone, or, you know, all these recording engineers. I got to work with George Bassenberg. I see Al Schmidt every week, you know, at our LA audio lunch. So the highlight of being in this business, I think for me, has got to be these wonderful people. And that's big names and customers, and just, you know, I explain this to kids when they come to tour the factory, and it's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And they're all like, I want to be a recording engineer. I want to be a recording engineer. It's like, okay, well, maybe not all of you guys are going to get to be recording engineers. And I certainly didn't even know what that was when I was your age. And I wasn't good enough, you know, sax player, but there are so many little pockets in the recording industry that we can all be in and work together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're all still a bunch of band geeks from, you know, we're all musicians, and we are with our people, you know. That's what, I think that's the best thing. It's the human connection for me, that's the high point of, beyond any whatever, accolades and so, whatever, but
Definitely go with that.
just connecting with people is the best part of the whole gig.
And my final question is, what would be the one thing you would like to see in the next 30 years? And it doesn't have to be recording technology or music related, just generally in terms of the future.
Well, to be honest, like, I'm 51 years old right now. I'm in good health. I've been successful at my business and smart with investments and so on. But what I don't have right now is time, like to just maybe go backpacking or ride a motorcycle or travel more or whatever. I do get to travel with my work, but for me personally, in the next 30 years, I want to find that time and be able to enjoy it doing physical things before my body craps out and or I'm dead, right? So as far as the industry goes, I'd like to see the low-resolution digital stuff get done with already. There's no reason we can't be dealing with high-res audio all the time. My buddy Christopher Bach, who is a really early employee at DigiDesign, the first day I met him, I remember he asked me a question directly. I just met him with some people like at a trade show. He said, you know, what are you doing to leave the planet a better place than you found it? And it's a great thing to ponder on, to think about all the time. I try to, I've got a hybrid electric car, you know, my motorcycles get 42 miles a gallon. we've got solar power on the roof at Manley Labs. You know, we're trying to do as much environmentally positive as we can. The new power supply, the switch mode power supply, is I forget, 96% efficient in itself. So waste less, you know, be friendly to the planet. It's the only one we've got.
See more of it, I gather.
Yeah, all that stuff's really important to me. And also, when I get the opportunity to be outside, backpacking or whatever, it helps me appreciate our environment very much more. So that's, we all need to leave the planet a better place than we found it. You know, I don't have children, and I'm not going to, but it's for future people. We have got to take care of this planet.
EveAnna Manley, it's been a real pleasure and a great privilege to meet you.
Thank you.
And, thanks for all the music you've given us and millions of others over the years, and much more to come. Great.
Thank you.